How's everybody doing today? Some of you are wondering what Satya Nadella doing on stage. No, I'm not Satya Nadella. Even though both of us come from the south, I have a better southern accent from the south of India, actually. What better place to have a talk about communication than the Spy Museum, right? Like, in case something goes wrong with the communication to James Bond, the wrong villain actually gets killed. So in the era of exponential IT, I work for the Infotech Research Group, and we firmly believe in this. Companies are going to change, business models are going to change, and the speed at which it's going to change is going to be very fast. This is from the Infotech Research Group. We've been talking to our customers for over 2 years about what's coming. That's because, sometimes you feel like IT and technology leaders actually may be a little bit lagging behind business because business comes and tells them what goals that we should achieve, and technology implements it. That's going to change drastically. Technology is going to be in the forefront of this. And one of the things that we keep asking people is not just about talking geek, but also about what is the career path for the technology leaders. And one of the things that comes back to us very often is, if you implement a project, what personal benefit do you have? Or is this your pathway to become a former CIO, right? So today here I was very pleased. I asked a lot of customers, including Jay from AMA. I asked, you've been using MarkLogic for a very long time. How did you benefit? She said, I got a promotion, I got a raise, and I've started implementing it across the organization, and I'm a good example. So give a big hand to Jay from AMA. The other thing when we talk, and we have almost 6,000 calls with our members every month, and some of the things that come out is, there are 4 things that IT leaders talk to us about. One is FOMO. Just like Ed mentioned, everybody is hearing in social media, in newspapers, and everything else that such cool AI projects are being done, and they're just saying, hey, we're just getting started, right? That's one. Number 2 is top-down pressure. I think Ari mentioned it like this. All the board and the CEOs are saying, we want you to implement IT. There's no goal associated with it, or sometimes even a budget associated with it, which is actually going back now because people are asking, like, what are you doing with that? The third thing is ChatGPT. I actually firmly believe ChatGPT, before ChatGPT, the only way you could access AI is through data science. You had to have a data scientist on board. Now people come to IT leaders and say, like, if ChatGPT can do this, why don't you give me something that's similar to that, right? So that's also a big problem. The fourth problem is actually employees. You hear this nice speeches about we're going to implement AI, but people forget to pass the message on to the line level. And what we know from a lot of research studies is the best and the most successful IT projects have been when the line managers have been involved, because they know what the problems are, they know how to solve them, and when you give them tools to solve those problems, like some of the examples that we saw about warehouses, I think John Ainsworth was talking about, how do you identify where there was a water leak in a warehouse, and how do you mitigate that? So that's the kind of problems that most of our members tell us about. This is very profound. I didn't think, and profound is a word that LLMs use very often, so if anybody uses profound, you can say like that's from an LLM. But I studied in India, and profound is something that I've always used. But you have to make your business leads understand you. And that's very important. If they don't understand you, chances are that they're not going to approve the project that you have been putting forward. And I heard a few examples of that during this conference too. Now, bridging the gap between technology and success, right? IT talks about machine learning, algorithm techniques, big data, but what business cares about is high revenue generation, lower customer attrition, enhanced thing. And I'll tell you a personal story of mine. Way before ChatGPT, about 7 years ago, we had a very unique problem in a startup that I was the chief marketing officer for. We had a lot of successful campaigns. all the leads that were coming in were well qualified. The sales team was doing a good job with managing those leads. Then the CEO and the board asked us, why isn't our revenue going up? I said, wow. Leads have increased tenfold. Sales team is doing a good job. Revenue is not increasing. So we used, at that time, there were no LLMs. We used a company to come and give us a machine learning model that looked at all our data. And that's how I got interested in the power of AI. So we looked at all our data. That's the first time I heard the term vector database. So we could take everything, put it in a vector database, spot the patterns in our prospect data that closely matched our customer data. Wow, that's theoretically, that was a very good use case, right? The way I got budget for that is I said the 1% change in win rate for the company meant that it's an upside in revenue of $250 or $250,000. There's no board on earth that will say like invest 60,000 and get back 250,000. So that's how we implemented it, and it was very successful. We did, I mean, same apprehensions. There was no question of hallucination because the data is ours. And that's exactly what we heard yesterday with the Progress agentic RAG, right? You have your own data. The model is only working on your data and is trying to tell you which prospects closely match your customers. It's ideally, you could probably, a human being could do that. It would take them a year, maybe thousands of spreadsheets. But this was fast, and it was almost daily scoring it. That was one example. Now, read the thing on the right. This is from one of our Infotech research group decks. If you look at it, some of the things are going to shock you, right? Having a seat at the table. When nobody understands you, they're going to say like, Shashi is smart, but he does a good job. We don't know what he does, but something seems to be working. Very bad position to be in, so you should be able to take your language down a little bit, and I have some examples that will go through that. And also in terms of internal reputation, if you keep talking technology in every meeting, when people don't understand you, your internal reputation also goes down, because people are going to blame everything and say like, hey, we don't know, something is not working, it's probably the technology's problem. So you got to be able to explain everything in terms that people understand. I'm sure this deck will be available, so I won't be reading all of this for you. It's not only just internally. Your customers are most likely to churn out if they don't understand what it is, right? People will say, one of the reasons I'm here is I'm part of some of the panels and webinars on analysts' talks about technology and new releases. Very often, the press releases will be almost like, I can imagine, a war and friction between probably marketing, PR, and technology. There will be terms in that probably LLMs don't understand too. And there'll be one sentence which probably a marketer fought for and put into the press release, which said like, hey, this is going to save developers 10 hours of time. And just like Ed said, he probably has a tool, 10 hours of developer time multiplied by whatever developer's rate is. That's exactly what it is. So that's what a press release needs to be, right? So your customers need to understand, if you use this tool, how are they going to benefit? Jay clearly understood it. She said, like, it's not only American Medical Association benefits, but I think this is an excellent use case. That's why you want to use this, is publishing. They publish a lot of important journals that all of us have to read. And this is from several groups. How do they manage it in such a way that it's published into multiple sources? So explain that in a clear way that I understood what Jay's job was very easily. So I'm part of this, not talking geek. Now, geek to English translation challenge. You think about, and I've had a few conversations here. People say like, hey, I'm talking to another developer, so I'm going to be talking about 21 million parameters and everything else. But that's not it. You've got to empower your customers, prospects, the counterpart that you're talking to, also to be able to internally educate. When you talk about internal education, I think I was talking to both Akhil and Jared Rebelski yesterday. So They were talking about what are your internal pain points and what is this solution going to do internally. So it's about proving the ROI, not in terms of almost every company on the earth that I've heard will say, you save time, integrate seamlessly, and customer vendor support is high, right? But you've got to be able to turn that into, again, I'm going to quote Ed, you've got to turn that into actual dollar value. You've got to turn that into what does your company care about ROI? What is the ROI? For example, I think I was also talking to Peter Kenny here. If you say like it's going to save your customer success time, you're part of the whole crowd. But if you're able to say like how many calls do you have? 10 million calls a year, and you save them 1 minute, it's like 10 million minutes saved, right? So that's the way to talk to them, and you have to go beyond just hype or talking about everything that the industry is talking about. When we describe products, 100 years ago when cars first came out, or maybe a little more than that, they were called horseless carriages, right? They didn't talk about, hey, it'll take you from one place to another. But today, when we want to go from one place to another, almost a lot of you today, because it was going to rain, I was running and you're all coming in Uber, right? So you wanted to get from place A to place B. That's how you have to describe it, not necessarily to say like this is a 130 horsepower, 6 CV engine or whatever technology says about it. On the right side, like Uber doesn't even own a car, but they get you from one place to another. And that's exactly what you have to think about software too. It's not about what your software is, but what it does. Does it make sense? Yeah. One of the most admirable people who could communicate very well was Steve Jobs. He didn't say, hey, we are going to have a processor that is very powerful or anything like that. He just said at that time, I'm going to give you a device that you're going to be able to read the New York Times on your device. When iPhone was first introduced, that was one of the first times that we all learned how to manage with a touch screen. But the competitor at that time was Nokia N95. And I had the Nokia N95. It was a good device, but it didn't survive. And Nokia is not even a telephone company now, whereas one of the most valuable companies is Apple. That's exactly what I'm talking about when you're able to, I mean, it's not only just like I would see people on metros, having that and saying like, I've got the world's best phone ever, and that's what Steve Jobs said. And today, Apple is still a very good marketing company. Now, speak their language and win their budget. This is very important sometimes because when you're speaking their language, in order to get budget, people won't just give you budget just like that, right? One of the things that I've learned in life is looking at user engagement and also telling them, and again, I have to use the same example of Gerald and Akhil from BCG, is you will never get a project because your technology is better. You will get a project if you prove that your counterparts, your stakeholders are successful. And you have to think about their problems. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says that, today is 16th of September. Today is the day I need to buy some software and let me go and talk to Progress, right? But they're going to wake up and say, like, the board has told me that I need to reduce costs in the call center, I need to reduce costs in our supply warehouse, or I need to reduce costs, or I need to communicate better, right? So that's why you've got to speak their language for you to be able to get budget. The same reason why I got budget for my small project 7 years ago is probably the reason you're probably going to get $1 million project because of that. I posted in LinkedIn about a week ago, like, don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. What happens here is we haven't talked as much about shadow IT. Maybe Ed mentioned it just once. If people are not convinced that they trust you as a technology leader, they're going to go and find their own solution. And one of the examples that I know of is when the customer side of the house wanted transcription. They wanted to be quickly able to wrap up notes for their agents. So they said like, hey, this is great. I can do it with ChatGPT, so let me go and find a company that does that for me using an LLM. Now, yeah, I was talking to Udall yesterday about it's almost a very similar functionality that Progress Agentic AI does. But it was much better to use a smaller model, lesser cost. So guess what? The shadow made them lose their yearly budget in 1 month because of the number of costs of the tokens that they used. Right. Now, language barrier in technology communication. One thing I wanted to point out, and Ed said, use the word world-class support, right? Now, at Infotech, we also have a quadrant that judges companies based on user surveys. So it's not only Ed who says that your customers for Progress Semaphore are actually saying, giving you about 90% for vendor support. So for you, it's better that your stakeholders go and talk about the good things that you're doing to help them in their business than you say that yourself, if that makes sense, right? And also another thing is that business value. CIOs look at it as the topmost before they buy it. And how quickly, business value in our scoring is how quickly did you get business value? Did it take you years or did it take you months? Most of the high scoring companies have done it within months. So guess how much Progress Semaphore got in our quadrant? Any guesses? 93% business value. So this is what I'm talking about. And also give the Semaphore people a big hand because they are top of the quadrant for the last 5 years in our thing. And again, this doesn't come if your customers don't understand what your software does. It doesn't come if your customers don't see the adoption. It doesn't come if your marketing message is not good. So the fact that your product is high on the, says that you're talking more about the business value than just geek. I asked a few people this question, and I think it's Tushar in the room. So yeah, when people describe a cloud, right? I mean, basically the business users don't want to understand everything on the left-hand side. And I asked Tushar, like, hey, how would you describe the cloud? Coincidentally, he used the exact 3 words that are on the right side of the screen, right? So that's exactly what people are looking for. They're not looking for all of this. They're looking for, I need to solve a problem where my information is accessible wherever I am, whether I'm in a laptop, whether I'm at home, and it should be secure and it should be simple to use. Do these words resonate? Are these something that you're using? Or I think sometimes technology leaders are in a race for who can put the most acronyms on a slide, right? So it's true. So if you're looking at it, you know, from features to impact, and I have a few failures that I've done too. Long before Google Photos was there or before Picasa was there, I was the product manager for network solutions. Some of you may remember network solutions. So I wasn't talking about, I was just thinking about those days digital cameras. It was very difficult to take your images from digital cameras to your laptop. So I was the email product manager, so I was trying to sell the product to my company to develop, which would take it easily from the digital camera directly to the email. But I wasn't explaining it to them in the way that, hey, you know, you can get more customers or our revenue will go up. I was just saying, like, this seems to be a cool way we should be doing this. A few months later, Picasa came. A few months later, Google acquired Picasa and became Google Photos. The other time that I failed was we acquired a company. I think it was almost very similar to what Adobe is today. And I was in charge of moving the company's assets into our platform. I was talking geek, so nobody understood it. Said, like, Shashi, smart guy, he seemed to have smart ideas. Let's look at it next year. And that next year never came. The importance of being a good communicator. I was talking to one of our members, CIO of a large pharmacy company. And he actually said, like, hey, we have a directive to implement AI. What should I do? So here's what we advised them. We said, don't take responsibility for AI projects till the stakeholders sign off. He pointed to the division, like if it is a pharmacist calling in several times to get the information, make it easy for them, but is that the project that should be number 1 or it should be number 2? So he set up an AI council. He set up an AI council where he didn't take the responsibility of saying, like, top down, this is the software that's coming to you. You need to get your team to work on it. What he said is, let's all decide jointly which is going to affect our bottom line a lot. Their biggest problem was people moving away from their pharmacy to another one, transfer. So how do they use AI to predict what are the signals that their customers are giving so that they'll be able to identify who has the most risk of moving from one prescription to another, and said, that's what we'll tackle first. So that was a good move. They also set up a sandbox. And again, this is the same study that Ed quoted also says that the highest number of successful projects have been where line managers were involved. And so it also helps create a sandbox where your employees can actually play a little bit, try to find experiments that they can implement in their thing. So that's another good one to do. Because if you don't do this and there's poor communication, and I'll give you another example very recently of a company that we heard. Overnight, they wanted to change everybody's password, and this was about, I think, 3 to 4 million customers. Anyone faced that before? Imagine the plight of the customer service place, right, where they were having like 40x calls that day. Everything, like their metrics were going bad. Even with that, AI could probably have solved it if they were implementing something like an intelligent virtual assistant to actually deflect some of the calls and things like that. So the message here is you have to be a good communicator, and your communication should actually be at a good level. And here are some ways, like make it two-way, timely, open and honest. I find that, again, back to the internal reputation, you have to communicate frequently. You have to tell people, and I have some ideas about what you should be implementing. It should be targeted, it should be authentic. Again, even internally, don't use too many buzzwords, too many things. Just tell them exactly how it's going to affect them, and that'll be good for them. So some of the ideas that we have, readability matters. And the first prize in this conference goes to John Ainsworth. A big hand for him, please. Like, I don't know if he ran his mom through the presentation or not, but I'm pretty sure she would have understood everything that he talked about in terms of 40 years of technology, right? And the second one goes to Narayan Ramesh. He talked about Dow Chemicals and how they're using data science, and it was as simple. I understood it, so I think that's a good mark. And also, I want to give a shout out to another presentation by Udall. I have never seen anyone explain RAG in such terms, including how he explained it to his nieces, right? So that's good. That's exactly, these are good examples of how you should communicate. I remember it. Many of you remember these presentations. I didn't attend all of them, so if I didn't mention any names, forgive me for that. That's true. So simplify your language and invite all divisions to your hackathon. I don't know if you all faced it, but marketers face this very often. You're walking in the corridor, somebody stops you and says, hey, you know what? This is what you should be doing in marketing. And probably IT leaders face the same thing. You know what? I did this with ChatGPT, and you should be doing that. So you should be facing that. So the way to mitigate that is to have frequent, people come to your hackathons. Invite other stakeholders, other divisions to your kickoffs, to your meetings, to your production meetings. Let them also understand. Because there was about decades ago, there was a study by MIT that said that the department that keeps getting forgotten when there's a new launch is usually customer experience. And during those days, the way they solved the problem was they staggered the lunchtime of people, because those days everybody was working in the office, so that the water cooler actually solved the problem. It wasn't any official communication. And I faced that too before. People who followed me on Facebook and LinkedIn actually learn more about company events than the official company thing. So here's one way of doing that. I know virtually you probably have different ways of doing hackathons, but there's no harm in inviting people. In fact, people are going to stop you less in the corridor, right, for that. Organize think and drink events. The reason I'm dressed like this today is this is the first conference where all the developers are dressed like marketers. So I said, let me change it a little bit. Now, because we are also not everybody is working in the office, It's a little bit difficult for leaders to communicate to each other. In the olden way, it used to be like, hey, I'm just going to take a walk to Ed's office and find out what he's got coming up, right? That's not there anymore. And when we spoke to leaders on one of the blueprints that I've written is about communication between marketing and technology. And one of the things that leaders said is, in order to have that kind of a camaraderie, what we do is we come one day early to conferences like this, and we set up meetings with our counterparts, very casual, and get to know them better. Video calls will never substitute face-to-face interactions, so that was good. The second thing was about exchange of ideas. Like I said, line managers, right? Get ideas from people. Tell them like, hey, what should we be focusing on? It's a good way for you to communicate what you're going to do, rather than people saying like, hey, I don't know, technology said we can only use this, we can't use anything else. So get those ideas out into the open, stack rank them. I mean, some of the ways we used to do it was to give them $100 kind of fake $100 and ask them to allocate that budget to any idea that was on the board, right? Things like that will help you much better. So, so what, right? Like when you talk about what your project can do for the company, talk about what is the business problem that it is solving. This is very important. Build trust and be transparent. One of the things that we noticed with CIOs and CTOs when they looked at software vendors, and we work mostly with CIOs and CTOs. The division that I have works with technology companies, kind of bridging the gap. And some of the times, like the technology leaders call me and say, like, I'm not able to get buy-in for this project. What am I missing? So we can probably guide them and say, like, look, you're talking geek. Nobody understands this presentation. Why don't you tell a story? So if you're on a sales call, and I think once again, like Gerald and I have had a great conversations on this, people are looking at features and the functionality only to a certain extent. What they care about is this person telling the truth? Can I trust them? They also care about, after I give them the contract, will I lose my job or not? And that goes to vendor support. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but Progress Semaphore has 90% in vendor support. Yeah, I did mention it before, right? So that's the kind of trust people should have, not only between vendors and CIOs, but between CIOs and their stakeholders. And quantifying the impact. Have these numbers with you. Without the numbers, I was just reading this morning while preparing for this talk, I was reading about an MIT study that said people have actually started doubting the AI, because these are all not the technology, but strategy. And I want to just give you a personal example of the 95% failure of AI projects, right? So for a long time, I used to go to the barber, never knew how to tell them what I needed. Showed them pictures, told them, make it medium cut, and I think they didn't understand. So very recently, AI solved the problem for me. Looked at 3 to 4 photos and said, when you go next time, say 2 to 3 on the side and 4 to 5 on top. It was magic. The next time I went, I did exactly what the AI told me until this weekend. So this weekend, I said the same thing, and guess what I got? 2 to 3 all over. So that's another 95% of AI project failed for you. But it isn't AI, right? The AI gave me the right answer. It's about how it's implemented, how people at the line actually develop it, right? So that's why I wanted to say, like, everybody needs to know the impact of the project that you're implementing. And one of the things that when you start talking less geek and more English, you will earn a seat at the table. I think Ari Lehavi is a great example. I think he meets the CEO very often. And one of the things that he did was he took the lawyers to lunch, he took his stakeholders to lunch and explained about all the products. He was talking about it yesterday at the customer panel, about what the impact is. And they said, wow, this is great. It's almost like having a meeting before the meeting to get approval. I think these are some good examples that you have. So in conclusion, technology is the engine, but communication is the fuel, and the business value is the destination. So everybody, let's drive it home. Thank you very much, everyone.